let's get started. One of the people that is most difficult to really analyze, and I think teeters between slightly overrated to slightly underrated in his career is Ice. He's a person that commonly gets really taken for granted or left out of discussions, mainly because on one aspect, if you look at European smashers, the people you're going to think of most are probably Armada and Leffen, because they're top 6, arguably top 2 caliber players. And so lost in the shuffle is Ice. He comes from a region that's not really well known for Smash in Germany. They are growing in size, but it's not really as well known of a Smash scene, even by European standards, when you compare them to regions such as the UK or Sweden. Whenever people outside of Europe, Americans like myself, think of European Smash, we immediately associate that with Sweden, with all their good players, or with the UK. Prior to that, it would be a little bit of Spain with Over Triforce and Straw Hat and Triphasia. The Netherlands with Remen, AMSA. I may have gotten some of the countries messed up. Needless to say, Ice comes from a very uncommon region. Very good player. But I think a lot of his early career was misguided in terms of perception. So he started his career back in 2011, had a lot of potential. So Beast 2, I believe, he got second place behind Armada. Armada was already an established player, coming out of Genesis, doing really well in U.S. tournaments. So that kind of broke our notion of whether or not Europe is good. And then there was a second tier of Europeans that weren't really exposed to the United States. So we knew that AMSA, the Sheik player, not the Yoshi main, was a really good, Sheik main, because, we can compare him to how he beat Captain Jack. Captain Jack came to the U.S. And so we had some basis of comparison to say, yeah, like, AMSA is really good. And he proved it, too, by doing really well at Pound 4. And then we had a slew of these second-tier Europeans at the time. The Ices, Remens, Ghetto, Adam, a lot of good like Falcos and Sheiks, over Triforce, players that we frankly were really tough to evaluate, and the Europeans would like hype these players up. They're saying like, "Oh, these players are really good. Like Ice is could be like a top 10 player," and this was like back in 2012. And Ice's technicals, and one thing that really amazed me about the Europeans, even when it came back to Apex almost 3.5 years ago, was their tech skill. They were really clean on doing the double stick down techs, what we know today as AMSA techs. They were really good at DI. They all had really good tech skill, and if there was a tech that they can hit to recover, they would nail it. Compared to Americans that weren't as clean on execution, the Europeans were very clean on inconsistent. So Ice looked really technical, and he looked really good. He was a Marthan Sheik man, and a lot of people made a comparison to make him like the European Mewtwo King. Not everybody, but some people really said like this is like the European Mewtwo King in the sense that he plays multiple characters really well. He was really technical, and he was just a really solid like Marth Sheik and a little bit of a Fox man. So a lot of people were really hyped, but I think a lot of people had skepticism. Lovage joked around after Apex 2012 saying like, oh, Europe is 33rd place. They're not that good. And Ice's like first performance in, along with many other Europeans like Hack and whatnot, they had a very poor showing at Apex 2012. There was really high expectations. Ice barely made it out of pools, had like a 3-way tie for second, and he barely made it out on some shenanigan-y tiebreakers. I believe he played Webbs, a Marth from New York, from the East Coast, and he barely made it out, and I don't think he should have, but he did through some shenanigan-y tiebreakers. He loses to HBK for like 33rd place, and so overall it's like, well, a lot of people were like, oh, this is like the European Mewtwo King, and he gets 33rd, loses to HBK, loses to Webbs. They were good, but they weren't like spectacular, and so there was a lot of disappointment with Europeans back in 2012, and you can kind of see remnants of it. And I think partially was because they were really overhyped. But to be fair, I think this is a lot. To be fair, like Europeans traveling to the U.S., it's tiring to deal with jet lag. You're not in prime condition. Apex is cold as hell. And plus, it's a fundamentally different game with PAL in many aspects. So, despite that, it's like very polarizing opinion on like what you would have of the Europeans. On one hand, like I felt they were overhyped, but on the other hand, like they had to deal with very difficult conditions that I think people that don't have really think about because they don't have to travel like across the world to play in like the competitions. Apex 2013, the year after, this is like his second appearance, and people were talking like Ice is really good. And if you watch the videos of him playing like over Triforce, Armada, Zagato, all these really good Europeans, he looked like amazing. Really knew how to power shield really well, and a lot of the technical skill that was really considered cutting edge. He knew and he executed it pretty well. His movement was really sleek. If you really watch his Marth and Sheik, it looked really nice, but he really didn't perform that well. In 2013, he beats like Zope, Light, Siren, and he beats Taupe in his pool. So those are decent wins, but he loses to Kobol and Taupe at Apex 2013 to get 25th. Better than his first appearance at 33rd, but once again, it kind of brought that notion of like, are the Europeans like just like technical? Do they know matchup knowledge? Or are they just a bunch of gimmicks? Do they just have tech skill? Do they just have this recovery? Or are they actually good? And for a certain moment in time, actually, after Apex 2013, if you follow the European scene and watch their videos, there was a short moment in time where Armada retired, and Ice at this point was probably the best player in Europe. Leffen didn't quite hit his stride at that point, although he was rising. Ice pretty much won everything from like Apex 2013 to the summer of EVO 2013. And so I think if you followed and you weren't ignorant, it's like you could kind of say like, yeah, like he's a really good player, but maybe he doesn't really perform well in the US. And EVO 2013 was his like breakout performance, although the bracket was a little bit easy on his end. Like he had to beat Lucian to get to like the final 16, but he did beat like Hax, who was arguably top 7 at the time, and he also beat Zoo, who's like a top 15 to 20 player back in 2013. And his losses were to Silent Wolf and Mango, and he got into the top 8. So this was like his breakout performance. Now we can put him in the discussion of like, okay, like things are starting to come together. He dropped Marth. His Marth frankly wasn't that great. He plays Sheik. His Sheik looks really nice. Really clean nair out of shields. Really good combo game. Really good platform movement. And that's when we begin to say like, okay, like he's had one good performance and 2 bad performances. So like, at least in the US. So like, where do we put him? But he's a good player. Apex 2014, I think, was a really polarizing thing, and this really shows like who's like really good at like analyzing, or who's like kind of following the memes that you see like spewed out on social media. So this was the infamous tournament. He gets 9th, which is actually really good for Apex 2014. But I think what stood out to many people was his losses to Soft, where he repeatedly tried to grab Soft, who was crouching. He would get punished for the rest. He was trying to run at Soft, who was recovering from the rest, get rested again. And it was like, and I think people remember the losses to Soft more so than the fact that he got 9th. He beat Hax, who's starting to pick Fox, but nonetheless he was still really good. Hax won the team tournament with Fox. He also beat Shroomed. And had he figured out the Puff matchup at that time, he would have made top 8, and maybe he would have beaten Kobol to get 6th at that tournament. And so now we get to realize, like, hey, like, yeah, Ice, if he has a little bit more experience, like maybe like, he is a top 15 player, maybe he's even a top 10 player. The fact of the matter is that because he's from Germany, there's so little data points, but like the notion that he's a top 10 player was there around that time. It was very impressive that he was able to beat these characters, and that he's able to do like great things even in Europe. But I think overall, like in that time frame, the questions were there. We all thought he was pretty good, just lacked matchup experience, and I think that the losses to Soft carried like this like really weird reputation with him for a really long time, to the point where it was like unfair, where no matter what he did to perform, no matter how well he did in Europe, even when Leffen was arguably a top 6 player, Ice was taking a lot of sets off of Leffen, which a lot of people don't realize. But Ice was going toe to toe with Leffen in 2014, where Leffen would take a few sets, Ice would take a few sets, and he was a really good player. Just because Europe doesn't get much exposure, he doesn't really get talked about. And then if we move on to like the modern era, Evo 2014 was probably not a great tournament for him. He lost to Fly, lost to the Moon. The Moon wasn't quite as good yet. He ends up in 33rd place. The Moon is really known for doing well against Sheik. But I think a lot of the tournaments like Evo 2014, Republic of Fighters, where he played Amsa, really showed that he didn't know how to deal with certain matchups. So Ice Climbers, I think he got whooped by Fly. Still had like no Marth experience because Europe didn't really have strong Marths. Like top Marths. Had no clue what to do against Amsa at Republic of Fighters. It was borderline embarrassing. It gives this perception of like, I think Leffen called it out around Republic of Fighters, where he said like Ice, like if you give him a matchup he knows, like Fox, Falco, Sheik, Peach, like he's really good at it. But if he doesn't know a matchup, like he will absolutely struggle and look like a total scrub. But I think in 2015 now, like if we look past his like really bad losses to Soft that were like embarrassing, given like his caliber of skill and how awful he looked against Amsa, I think 2015, if you really look at his play, look at his performances, look at his new Fox that looks like a mini Leffen at times, he's actually fixed a lot of the issues in matchup weaknesses that we thought were big weaknesses of Ice. The fact that he lost to the Moon, HBK, Webs, indicate that he probably isn't that great against Marth. He still isn't the best, but he's gotten better at it. At Apex 2015, he beat Hugs, he beat S2J, had a very unfortunate run into Hungrybox for like 17th place or 13th place, I think. And then at Evo 2014, he beat Fly, Chudat, Ken, and some other good people. And it really goes to show, like, so he got 9th at Evo 2 this year, and it really goes to show that he's becoming a lot more of a well-rounded player. I don't think he's going to get gimmicked by Ice Climbers. Really solid Fox Ditto. If you really watch him play, he knows a lot of the matchups really well, and I don't think he has as many weak matchups as he did in 2013. But it's just unfortunate that in perception that I think Ice is the player that gets lost in discussion. And even though he got 9th at Evo 2015, like I feel like in 4 months, because he can't enter like anything substantial, he's not sponsored, lives in a desolate region, like he doesn't have the opportunity to go on streams regularly or get the exposure he needs. But Ice is really good. The top 25 is coming around. He's got the tech. He has really strong technical skills. He's really fundamental. And he has a lot of great attributes, and he is a player that gets overlooked, that is in that top 15/top 20 range. And if he continues to pick things up and fix some of his weaknesses, like he can be in that back in that discussion of like the borderline top 10. So I really hope that like as we move forward that Europe gets more exposure, and that's part of the reason why I did this video specifically on Ice, because I think the global presence of Smash is growing bigger. Europe is getting bigger. We see scenes getting bigger in a lot of regions. So if you read Melee It On Me and seen the community spotlight articles, there's a lot of regions that are actually growing in Smash that are churning out a lot of good players that people are sleeping on. So that's pretty much my talk, and top 25 will be coming out soon, so I hope that you guys are excited for that.